The Auschwitz concentration camp complex was the largest of its kind established by the Nazi regime. It included 3 main camps, all of which deployed incarcerated prisoners at forced labor. One of them also functioned for an extended period as a killing center.
Auschwitz I was the main of the 3 concentration camps. It was constructed to serve 3 purposes. The first was to imprison real and perceived enemies of the Nazi regime and the German occupation authorities in Poland. The second purpose was to have a supply of forced laborers for deployment in SS-owned construction-related enterprises available. The last purpose was to serve as a site to physically eliminate small, targeted groups of the population whose death was determined by the SS and police authorities to be essential for the security of Nazi Germany. Auschwitz I had a gas chamber and crematorium. At this concentration camp, SS physicians performed medical experiments on some of the prisoners. They conducted pseudoscientific research on infants, twins, and dwarfs, and performed forced sterilizations, castrations, and hypothermia experiments on adults. Between the crematorium and the medical experiments barracks stood the Black Wall, where SS guards executed thousands of prisoners.
Auschwitz II is also known as Auschwitz-Birkenau. This concentration camp began in 1941. Auschwitz-Birkenau's main focus was execution. It contained the facilities for a killing center. It played a key role in the Germans' plans to kill the Jews and Europe. The main form of killing was with gas chambers. Gassing operations continued until 1944, when the SS was ordered to disable all the gas chambers that still functioned. The SS destroyed the remaining gassing installations as Soviet forces approached in January 1945. Many people were killed during Auschwitz II. These included at least 960,000 Jews, 74,000 Poles, 21,000 Gypsies, 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war, and 10,000 to 15,000 people of other nationalities.
Auschwitz III, or Monowitz, was the last of the 3 Auschwitz camps. Of the 3 Nazi concentration camps located near the town of Auschwitz, the Auschwitz III camp was the most important to the Nazis because of its factories, which were essential to the German war effort. The Monowitz industrial complex was built by Auschwitz inmates, beginning in April 1941. Prisoners were selected among all the inmates to be considered workers. Most of the time, women and children were immediately sent away to be killed because they weren't thought of as suitable enough to work at the camp. This was also the case with the men who weren't chosen to be forced into labor. In the first period, prisoners were working in the construction of the factory. Later, they built barracks and created their own prison. People who worked in Auschwitz III Monowitz were brutally treated. The so-called workers had to be tattooed, which means numbers were burned into their forearms so guards could keep track of them easier. They worked in rubber plants, stone quarries, experimental farms, and arms manufacturing. The Nazis also conducted medical experiments on the prisoners at this camp.
SS and police authorities established a forced labor camp for Jews known as Treblinka. The camp also served the SS and police authorities as a so-called labor education camp for non-Jewish Poles whom the Germans perceived to have violated labor discipline. Both Polish and Jews inmates imprisoned in separate compounds of the labor camp were deployed at first labor. The majority of the forced laborers worked in a nearby gravel pit. The camp was divided into 3 parts: the reception area, the living area, and the killing area. The living area contained housing for German staff and the guard unit. It also contained administrative offices, a clinic, storerooms, and workshops. One section contained barracks that housed those Jewish prisoners selected from incoming transports to provide forced labor to support the camp's function, mass murder.
Chelmna was the first stationary facility where poison gas was used for mass murder of Jews. Prisoners were tricked into thinking they were being transported, but they had to shower to get cleaned off first. This ploy brought them into gas chambers where they were killed. Graves quickly filled, so the bodies had to be burned.
Lodz, located in central Poland, held the second largest Jewish community in Europe. When the Nazis attacked, Poles and Jews worked frantically to dig ditches to defend their city. Only 7 days after the attack on Poland began, Lodz was occupied. Within 4 days of Lodz occupation, Jews became targets for beatings, robberies, and seizure of property. On February 8, 1940, the order to establish the Lodz Ghetto was announced. The original plan was to set up the ghetto in one day, but it took weeks. Jews from throughout the city were ordered to move into the sectioned-off area, only bringing what they could pack within a few minutes. The Jews were packed tightly within the confines of the ghetto, with an average of 3.5 people per room. In April, a fence went up surrounding the ghetto. On April 30th, the ghetto was ordered closed, and on May 1st, 1940, merely 8 months after the German invasion, the Lodz Ghetto was officially sealed.
Warsaw's pre-war Jewish population was more than 350,000, constituted about 30% of the city's total population. The Warsaw Jewish community was the largest in both Poland and Europe, and was the second largest in the world. On October 12, 1940, the Germans decreed the establishment of a ghetto in Warsaw. The decree required all Jewish residents of Warsaw to move into a designated area, which German authorities sealed off from the rest of the city on November 1940. The ghetto was enclosed by a wall that was over 10 feet high, topped with barbed wire, and closely guarded to prevent movement between the ghetto and the rest of Warsaw. The population of the ghetto was established at over 400,000 Jews.
Upon the German invasion of Poland, the German army occupied Krakow in the first week of September 1939. The German military authorities initiated immediate measures aimed at isolating, exploiting, and persecuting the Jews of the city. In May 1940, the Germans began to expel Jews from Krakow to the neighboring countryside. By March 1941, the SS and police had expelled more than 55,000 Jews. About 15,000 Jews remained in Krakow. In early March 1941, the Germans ordered the establishment of a ghetto. The Germans established several factories inside the ghetto, where they deployed Jews at forced labor. Several hundred Jews were also employed in factories and forced labor projects outside the ghetto.
Babi Yar is a ravine located in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. It's also a place where a series of massacres happened by the Nazis during their campaign against the Soviet Union. Kiev contained a Jewish population of 175,000. On the 29th and 30th of September, nearly 34,000 Jews of the ghetto were brought Babi Yar. Men, women, and children were machine-gunned in a 2-day execution. In months, most of the remaining population was exterminated. A concentration camp named Syrets was built in 1942 at a location on the northern edge of the city of Kiev, only a few hundred meters from Babi Yar. Interned communists, Soviet POWs, and captured Soviet partitions were murdered there. It is estimated that about 25,000 people died in the Syrets camp. Several hundred selected prisoners were quartered there. The mass murder of these Jews continued until October 3, 1941. According to Soviet sources, 100,000 to 200,000 people were shot at Babi Yar.
Ladice was liquidated because it was thought to aid assassins who killed SS officer Reinhard Heydrich. Every male over the age of 16 was killed, and women were sent to concentration camps. Children were also sent to concentration camps, and if they were lucky, they were eventually sent to Nazi orphanages. Every building in the village was destroyed, and the land was leveled. Grain was then planted over the ground, and the name of the city was taken off the German maps.
On November 9, 1938, the Nazis unleashed a wave of programs against Germany's Jews. In the space of a few hours, thousands of synagogues and Jewish businesses and homes were damaged or destroyed. This event came to be called Kristallnacht, or Night of Broken Glass, or the shattered store window panes that carpeted German streets. Stormtroopers killed at least 91 Jews and injured many others. For the first time, Jews were arrested on a massive scale and transported to Nazi concentration camps.